This episode is sponsored by our friends at Adobe. With the rapid pace of change we are all living and working in, learning has never been more crucial. But let's be honest, most corporate learning platforms are outdated, hard to use, and quite honestly boring. But what if you could fix all of that and give the users a consumer-grade experience that is easy to set up, allows you to scale as you grow, and is audit ready and compliant? Adobe Captivate Prime allows you to do just that. It's an award-winning learning management system that actually provides an enjoyable experience. You can't upskill and retrain your people if they don't want to use the platform you're providing. If you want to see what the future of learning looks like, check out www.adobe.com/LMS/demo. Again, that URL is www.adobe.com/LMS/demo. Go there and get a free demo of what the future of learning looks like.
Today we are starting to see drones, as you said, but if you look in the sky, it's almost never that you actually see an aircraft flying overhead. And yet, almost every second, you see a car going by on the ground. You know, when I was a flight instructor flying over Los Angeles, I used to fly every day and have a student next to me, look down at the freeways, and they're jam-packed with people. These cars are just stopped, and I felt so bad for all these miserable people stuck in traffic. And I'm the only one up here in the sky, and I was like, why is not more people in the sky with me? And so I've dedicated my life and my career to helping extend the benefits of flight to more and more people in their daily lives.
That's Ben Marcus, the co-founder and chairman of Airmap, a company that develops the digital infrastructure, standards, and services for drones to fly safely at scale. Basically, they create the digital highways that allow for drones to fly. My brother Josh is the first person I know who had a drone, and that was many years ago. At the time, I thought, those things are so cool, but I viewed them mainly as gadgets. Today, drones are having a dramatic impact on business, society, and the world at large. This is actually the first episode I've done specifically focused on drones and how they will shape the future of work. Today's discussion is a very cool and futuristic one, and some of the things that we talk about sound like they came out of a science fiction novel. You may be wondering, what do drones have to do with the future of work? Well, today you will find out how drones will impact talent, cost savings, headquarter locations, transportation in the form of flying vehicles, jobs, safety for employees, and much more. Ben also shares his advice for individuals and leaders looking to get more involved in the drone space and things they should be doing and thinking about today.
Whenever there is a new breakthrough technology introduced, people have to kind of understand that, and it takes time for them to understand that. In the 90s, nobody really understood that there was a reason to have maps in your phones, but now we take maps in our phones for granted. Or, when the first smartphone came out, nobody thought that they needed a camera in their phone. Or, what are people going to do with their camera phones that's going to invade my privacy? We've gotten over that. When cars first came out, people were so afraid of cars that you had to have flagmen who walked a quarter mile ahead of the car with orange flags to get people off the road. Before the car came through at a blazing 5 miles an hour. So yes, people are going to have to, over time, learn what this new technology means for them in their lives, get used to it, understand the value of it, and then take it for granted, ultimately, is what happens.
This is Jacob Morgan, best-selling author, speaker, and futurist. Welcome to the Future of Work podcast, where every week I speak with C-level executives, business leaders, and authors to explore how the workplace is changing and what the future of work is going to look like. The goal of this show is to give you the insights, the ideas, and the inspiration to help future-proof your career and your organization. If you want to get access to more content, such as podcast transcriptions and information on working with me or having me keynote your next event, you can visit my website at thefutureorganization.com. If you want to take your education even further by getting access to courses that explore these themes in more depth, then check out futureofworkuniversity.com. Also, if you get a few seconds, please rate and review the podcast on iTunes or whatever your preferred channel is. It really helps the show, and I personally appreciate it, since the podcast does take quite a bit of effort to produce. In case you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or working with me, my email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Future of Work podcast. My guest today is Ben Marcus, founder of Airmap. Ben, thank you for joining me.
Great to be here.
So I have to confess, this is the first ever show that I've done where we're specifically going to be looking at drones. And I actually remember the first time I saw a drone, my brother is actually the first person I know who bought a drone. And this was years ago when they were huge. I think it was DJI that made one of the first ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now where I live, I go outside and regularly I see a drone flying over my head. I go to the park, I see a drone flying around. Like, you see them everywhere now. So I'm so fascinated by this, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you about all these things. But let's start with some background information about you. How did you get involved with this stuff and finding and creating Airmap?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so my story really starts when I was a kid. I grew up right next to a very small airport. And like a lot of kids who grew up next to small airports, I spent a lot of time hanging onto the chain link fence, looking at the runway, watching airplanes taking off and landing, and really fell in love with aviation from a very young age. And I read all the books I could find. Eventually, I started taking flying lessons. In fact, when I was 10 years old, I was kind of young to do that, but befriended some people at the airport, used to bum rides off people, wash airplanes in exchange for flying lessons, and became a pilot, became a flight instructor, taught people how to fly, and then after college became a flight test engineer, certifying airplanes. One of the most sort of formative moments for me was as a volunteer when I was 13 years old. I used to volunteer for a nonprofit organization called Angel Flight, which is a group of volunteer pilots that fly people in medical and financial need. So if you live in a remote area and you need to get to a city, to a hospital for specialized treatment, and you wouldn't otherwise have the means to get there, volunteer pilots would come and pick you up and fly you to where you needed to go for healthcare. So 2 days a week after school, I used to go to the Angel Flight office, and I would make phone calls to these volunteer pilots, asking them if they could take this mission or that mission. And occasionally I got to fly along with these pilots as a co-pilot. I wasn't really a capable co-pilot, but I got to ride along with them and see what it was like. And it was through this that I gained an appreciation for the incredible value that aviation has to offer people in their daily lives and how little utilized that resource is. Today we are starting to see drones, as you said, but if you look in the sky, it's almost never that you actually see an aircraft flying overhead. And yet almost every second you see a car going by on the ground. You know, when I was a flight instructor flying over Los Angeles, I used to fly every day and have a student next to me, look down at the freeways, and they're jam-packed with people. These cars are just stopped, and I felt so bad for all these miserable people stuck in traffic. And I'm the only one up here in the sky, and I was like, why is not more people in the sky with me? And so I've dedicated my life and my career to helping extend the benefits of flight to more and more people in their daily lives. So like you and your brother, back in 2014, I had a friend who took me to the local park to show me his DJI drone. And it was amazing. I'd grown up flying remote control airplanes that you build out of balsa wood and glue and, go to the model flying field and
I remember those.
Yeah. Have some older guy who had been doing it for 40 years teach you how to fly this thing. And
then when they crash, your life is over.
Right. It's like, dang, I just worked on that all summer long and I just flew it once and it crashed. But the DJI drone was like totally different. You bought this thing at Best Buy for $500. You took it out of the box, dirt simple to fly, basically couldn't crash. And it was live streaming 4K video anywhere in the world. This is amazing. Like if I wanted to have that kind of capability just a couple years before, I had to be a military with $50 million. And now anybody could have it for $500. And so my eyes really opened up to say, wow, all of this technology from mobile phones and cloud computing is coming together and actually making a difference in aviation. We have high-speed processors, we have LTE and eventually 5G connectivity, we have batteries that are extremely high performance. And so we can package all this together into this really incredible tiny aircraft. And so this vision that I had when I was a kid of everybody flying to work is clearly just around the corner now. The technologies have come together to make that future a reality. So the question was, what can I do to help accelerate that future? What can I help to contribute to this industry and make that future a reality? And so I started looking all around the world and learning what was happening in the space. There were already thousands of innovators building amazing drones like DJI. There are lots of people working on software for drones for different industrial applications, and hopefully we'll talk about those in a minute. But the thing that was really lacking was an airspace management system that would serve to orchestrate high-scale activity in the low-altitude airspace. The way that air traffic control is done today is a very manual process. Air traffic controllers are sitting behind radar screens, looking at these blips on a monochrome screen and talking to pilots on AM radio. It's so archaic. Like literally, you can't have two people talking on the radio at the same time. And it clearly wasn't going to scale to millions of drones flying every single day. So that's what we set out to solve about 5 years ago, and that's what we've been building here at Airmap.
So you guys are basically the the highway of the skies, so to speak, for drones.
Exactly. We think of it as the digital infrastructure, the digital highways that allow for drones to fly.
Okay, so let's say I live in the Bay Area. So for drones that are flying here, let's say near me there are 100 drones flying. So how do they feed into Airmap? Does Airmap sort of they connect to Airmap and you tell them how far away from each other they are, like what's near them, or what does the platform actually do?
Yeah, so the core of our platform is what we call the Airmap, hence the name. The Airmap you can think of as a 3D map, but that also has the fourth dimension of time. So we need to know what's going on in the past, the present, and the predicted future of all of these data attributes in the airspace. So, of course, drones can't run into obstacles. So we need to know where all the obstacles and the terrain, buildings, et cetera. We need to know what are the regulations. Some of those are static, some are dynamic. If there's some temporary restriction for some reason, we need to know about the weather. We need to know about flights. Where are drones and manned aircraft like helicopters, and where are they going to be? So we take this four-dimensional air map, and on top of that, we build a set of services for these drones and their operators to consume. So one example of an early service that we started providing is airspace authorization. So if you want to fly a drone in controlled airspace, which is near airports, and thankfully in the United States we have a lot of airport infrastructure, which is great because it's so easy to get around by airplane. But it also means there's a lot of controlled airspace right around cities where most people live. So if you want to fly in this controlled airspace, you need to have authorization from the FAA. Well, it wasn't reasonable for drone pilots to communicate with the air traffic control tower on a two-way radio the way that airplane pilots do. So there had to be another system. And so we created this digital system, and we became the first company in the history of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, to provide third-party services that provide air traffic control authorizations. So basically, you can communicate with air traffic control through our platform and get an authorization to fly automatically, digitally, in less than 2 seconds, compared with what would otherwise be a long paper process that could take 90 days. So that's one example of a service that we provide on top of our Airmap. More advanced things you can think of are like routing. So Waze, or Google Maps used to navigate around cities. Similarly, Airmap provides a routing engine that allows for highly automated drones to plan safe and efficient routes from one point to another, taking account of all of the other traffic, any regulations, risk to people on the ground, so on and so forth. One third example that I'll give is actually a service not for the drone operator, but for law enforcement. So one of the critical things as the number of drones in the airspace increases is to understand who is good and who's not good. These things may not always be used for good purposes. So law enforcement wants to be able to look in the sky, see a drone, and be able to determine who the operator of that drone is. And without having a big giant license plate on the thing is very difficult to do. So we have a remote identification system that allows for competent authorities like law enforcement to be able to identify the operators of these drones they see flying overhead. So those are some examples, and there's a lot more.
That's pretty cool. I honestly had no idea that any of this stuff even existed. I mean, like most people, when it comes to drones, I'm pretty naive. You just think like, oh, look, there's somebody that's flying a drone in the sky. You don't think that there's like this whole infrastructure that is required to kind of make these things happen. How many employees do you guys have at Airmap? And how many drones are you guys tracking or working with on at any given time?
Yeah, so Airmap is now 100 people. We are based in Santa Monica, California, in the Los Angeles area. We also have offices in Zurich, Switzerland, and in Singapore. We also have a joint venture in Japan with Rakuten, the leading e-commerce company in Japan.
Of course, I know them.
Yep, and we are managing thousands of flights on a daily basis. The U.S. FAA, through the manual air traffic control process we described earlier, provides services for about 45,000 airline flights per day. They have 15,000 air traffic controllers. Yeah, totally crazy, totally unscalable.
Wow.
We're providing services for more drone flights than they are airline flights, and we only have 100 people. So it gives you a sense for what automation can do.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy. So I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are thinking, okay, drones, we get it, it's cool. The podcast is about the future of work. What do drones have to do with work, with jobs, with careers, with anything that's going on in the business world?
So let's start by talking about this long-term future, this future of urban air mobility flying around cities. I think that has the potential to totally transform urban life, both how we live and how we work. So today people are stuck in traffic trying to get to work. If you live in the Bay Area and you live, in the East Bay, you could have a commute of an hour or more to get into San Francisco.
Oh, easy. Yeah, that's being nice. And I used to live in Los Angeles. I went to Santa Monica Community College many, many years ago, and I'm very familiar with the 405, the 101 commute, and that was just soul-sucking.
It's crazy. I mean, in Southern California, we have 400,000 supercommuters, which is defined as a 1.5 hour drive each way to work. So wow. 400,000 people are spending 3 hours a day on the highways getting to and from work. It's total lost productivity.
It's a part-time job. That's 15 hours a week. That's
yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's extremely expensive in all sorts of dimensions. And so if you can fly to work, you can avoid all of that lost productivity, all of that expense, and you can basically live where you want. If you can fly at 100 miles an hour instead of being stuck in traffic at 20 miles an hour, you could live 5 times further away and have the same commute time. So I actually think that this is going to lead to a de-urbanization trend. And I think it'll counter a lot of the negative consequences that have come from urbanization. I think we could have a lot more green space. You need far fewer parking lots and fewer roads. We can have a much more environmentally sustainable way of life going forward. So that's a really exciting future. But what's happening right now with drones is largely in the area of industrial inspection. So there are all kinds of industries today that are benefiting from drones by saving cost, improving quality, and improving safety of their workers. I'll give you just one example, and we can talk about more. One really interesting example is inspecting telecommunications towers. So I didn't realize this until recently, but most telecommunications towers are owned by real estate owners, not by the telecommunication companies themselves, not by the mobile network operators. And
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, and these telecom tower owners lease space on those towers to the mobile network operators. So if you're Verizon or AT&T or whomever, you would lease some space and you would put your antenna on this tower. Well, the tower companies need to inspect their towers every so often to make sure that the tenants, the mobile network operators, have actually installed the equipment at the right place, the place that they've contracted for, because a slightly different position on the tower could result in a very different service level for customers around and a different rent that's due to the tower company. So that's one reason why they have to do it. The other reason is for structural reasons. If you have too many antennas in the wrong places or something, the tower could be susceptible to wind damage or structural failure. So typically, these tower companies are inspecting their towers twice per year. And the way that it's done now is that they send a truck out with two men that throw ropes up on this tower. They climb these ropes. They're hanging from these ropes in the wind and taking photos with a digital camera.
It's like a Mission Impossible movie.
Right. Very inaccurate, very dangerous. In fact, people die every year doing this. And they take this data off this digital camera and they email it to some back office engineer has to do some analysis. It's a very time-consuming and unscalable process. So it costs them about $4,500 on average to do one of these inspections on a tower. With a drone, they can do it for about $500. So $4,000 of savings. You only have to send one person out. They have a drone in a box in the back of their truck. They put it down on the ground. They hit the green button for go. The drone autonomously flies the mission, collects all the data, automatically pushes that into the cloud, gets built to, into a 3D model that you can then run analysis on. So you get much better results, much lower cost, much better safety. And so if you multiply those savings times two inspections per year per tower, it's $8,000 a year. And the biggest cell tower owner in America has something like 80,000 towers. So 600 million plus of potential savings just for that one tower owner in direct cost, not to mention recovery of extra revenue. Multiply that by multiple tower owners, multiply that by all the countries in the world. Plus we have 5G coming soon, and there going to be many, many more cell sites that need to be inspected. And then all of these industries that are seeing similar benefit: oil and gas, power infrastructure, all kinds of construction, mining, agriculture, railroads, civil infrastructure like bridges, ports. The list goes on and on and on. So this is how drones are being used today, and it's saving billions of dollars for companies all around the world.
And I think the other one, most people see I think it was a fake Amazon commercial, but everybody remembers seeing that. What was it, last year or the year before, of sort of the Amazon idea for how they would like packages to one day be delivered, where a bunch of drones are flying around, dropping things off. So I guess there's also a lot of impact for us as consumers to be able to get products delivered too.
Absolutely. That is starting. It's Amazon has been investing in this for nearly a decade, believe it or not.
Wow.
They have a very large team working on package delivery drones. It's going to be an incredible service. It's going to be faster, more environmentally friendly than putting packages on last mile delivery trucks. It's going to be great. And they're not alone. UPS has just started doing small package last mile delivery.
What was it, yesterday or day before yesterday? What was it, with CVS, I think it was?
Exactly. Yeah. CVS, FedEx is starting, Walgreens is starting, in other places around the world. It's been going for a while as well. Like in China, JD.com, the big e-commerce company, has been delivering packages with drones. SF Express, which is a courier similar to UPS in China, has been using drones for quite some time. There's an incredible company based in the Bay Area called Zipline that has been delivering blood with drones to outlying areas in Africa where otherwise it would be very difficult to get blood delivered to clinics. So a lot of incredible logistics use cases that are already starting, but we're just scratching the surface. There's also a lot of really interesting business use cases for these delivery drones for logistics, not just B2C. So, if you are a manufacturing facility and you need parts delivered just in time, or you have a production line shut down, you need to get parts to the production line to get it restarted. All of those types of applications are also very viable with delivery drones. And I know that there's a number of automobile manufacturers that have been experimenting with that.
Even for insurance, I was told, a lot of insurance, to inspect a house, to inspect a car, you can fly a drone out there, look at damage that might be done to a house in a particular area. So there are lots of different areas where drones, I think, are starting to have a pretty big impact. Do you have a sense of how many drones are out there in the world today? Are we talking like thousands, millions?
Yeah, millions. I estimate it's more than 10 million. In the United States, there are 5 times as many drones registered as there are traditional aircraft. So, more than 1 million drones are registered just in the United States. Fewer than 200,000 traditional airplanes are registered in the United States. So it's already huge, and it's growing very rapidly. In fact, we had a major manufacturer of drones tell us that their sales to enterprise increased by 80% in the last year.
Wow. And these are just the registered ones. There's also plenty of unregistered ones.
That's right.
That's crazy. I'm trying to even think back. I remember a couple of years ago when my brother first got his drone, he's like, one day you're going to see drones everywhere in the sky. And I'm like, you're nuts. Like, that's never going to happen. And then a couple of years later, here you are, at the park, and somebody takes out a drone, and they're now as small as little things that can fit into your pocket.
That's
so
right.
It's crazy to see how they've been evolving over time.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that flying a drone remains a relatively manual process today. You still need to have some degree of skill. You still need to have visual line of sight to the drone. So it's still like a very intense activity. But what will come soon is drones as a service. So if you're a consumer, and let's just say you want to have a picture of the roof of your house, or you're a business and you need your construction site inspected, whatever, you won't need to own a drone. You won't need to know how to pilot a drone. You'll simply need to make a request through the internet for some data that you want collected by a drone. A drone will automatically be dispatched from a little box that's somewhere close by to where you live or work. The drone will collect the data for you, and you'll have it in your inbox in 5 minutes. And that will really start to scale the applications. It'll make it so easy for anybody to benefit from one of these things. We're still a few years away from that, mostly because of regulatory constraints. The technologies exist, but we need to continue as an industry to work on showing the general public and through their regulators and their legislators that there are sufficient safety systems in place to make this something that is worthwhile doing.
Do you think drones are relevant to any company, any industry? I mean, I'm thinking like professional services. What if you're like a McDonald's or Sephora or, I don't know, Audi, MasterCard?
Sure.
Do you see drones being applicable to literally just any kind of business, any company that's out there?
I think nearly any company. Yeah, it's hard to say every single company, but for the retailers that you mentioned, certainly their customers may have a last minute demand for some product. Let's say, my wife is going to go out to a fancy dinner and she's missing her eyeshadow. She could order from Sephora and have this thing delivered in 5 minutes. I think more on the sort of industrial side, a company like Audi, certainly you would see using drones at their manufacturing facility, not only to inspect their cars, but also to inspect their facility. You brought up insurance earlier. There's myriad uses for insurance, both during the underwriting process to confirm condition of a piece of property in advance of offering insurance, and also for claims after some damage has occurred. So I think drones are going to be absolutely ubiquitous. And then when we get to this future of flying cars, there's no reason why you shouldn't see one of these things, passing by every few seconds, just in the same way that you see a car going by every second on the road.
Wow. And so I'm going to ask you about that next, because I'm really, I love science fiction. I read a lot of science fiction books. So this idea of flying, flying people around is super cool. But I wanted to ask you before we jump into that, when you think about the impact that this will have on communities, because earlier you mentioned it'll change, for example, how maybe cities are designed. And I suppose this is also very relevant for how companies think of their space, where they create headquarters, where they even maybe attract talent, where they hire from. Do you see potential implications just in the world of talent with drones?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this could be a huge benefit for employees, offering a way to connect physically from your work to your home in a shorter period of time in a more comfortable environment, I think is a huge boost. So in fact, I read that when Amazon was doing its search for HQ2, it had plans to have heliports, what today we call heliports, on top of its building. So that was kind of part of the part of the pitch. In the future, we'll call those vertiports, where these vertical takeoff and landing largely electric vehicles will be flying. But yeah, I think it's going to be a tremendous benefit. There's a company down here in Los Angeles starting very, very soon, which is going to use traditional small aircraft, 8-seaters, to connect all the local airports around Southern California, so that people who live in outlying areas can fly on one of these airplanes to a airport close to their work. And the idea there is to make this a commuter benefit for employees. So if you're an employer, maybe you've organized van pools in the past to help get people to work. Now this will be like a van pool in the sky. So I think it's definitely a very interesting advantage, not only as a perk, but also as a way to increase the productivity of your talent.
And I know this might sound like a dumb question, but bear with me because I'm a little naive when it comes to drones. So I'm thinking like the first thing that pops into my mind is a helicopter, right? I mean, a helicopter. So it's sort of like a bunch of little mini helicopters just flying around everywhere. And so would the drone, like I'm just trying to visually imagine how you would get into a drone or be picked up by a drone and transported to work. And the only thing that just mentally I can conjure up is a helicopter. Are we talking about something similar like that? Or are we talking about like, some other designed contraption that, like you're standing in the drone as it's teleporting you around or moving you from place to place? Like how does the logistics of that work?
Sure. And I would encourage anybody who's listening to go to YouTube and search for Uber Elevate, which is Uber's future vertical takeoff and landing urban air mobility program.
I remember seeing, I think that weren't they testing that in like Dubai?
There have been some electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft tested in Dubai, also recently in Singapore. Uber just started something called Uber Copter, which is using traditional helicopters to fly people between Manhattan and JFK Airport to skip the traffic.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, but if you go to the videos really help paint the picture. But so check out YouTube and look up Uber Elevate. But I'll kind of explain. You can expect to have seamless multimodal journeys. So if you need to go from home to work, you will open up an app. Let's just pretend you're using Uber, but you could use any other one. And you'll say, okay, I need to go to work. And it'll say, okay, you have a few options, right? You could take UberX all the way, and it's going to cost you whatever. Or you could take Uber Air. And to get to the vertiport where this thing's going to take off, you could either take an UberX, or you could take a scooter, or you could take a shared bike, whatever. And then once you arrive at the destination vertiport, you have 100 meters to walk to your office, let's say. So you take your bike, you take your scooter, you take your UberX to the vertiport, which maybe is 5 or 10 minutes away. You would get in an elevator inside of an office building or a dedicated structure that is yet to be built. You go up to the sort of reception area. Would be a very small area. You would do a really quick check-in with like a QR code and a little gate that would open up, and you would walk out to your waiting electric helicopter, essentially. These will look somewhat similar to helicopters, but they will have what's called distributed electric propulsion. So rather than having a single main rotor at the top of the helicopter, you will have multiple motors and multiple rotors. Could be 6 or 8. And this allows for a higher level of redundancy and more controllability and much, much safer than the traditional helicopter. You would get into this thing. You might be sharing it with 3 other people, like a Uber pool. It'd be extremely quiet. It would lift off. It would transition from looking like a helicopter to looking like an airplane. So these things have wings for forward flight. And you would zip very efficiently to the vertiport closest to your work. The aircraft would then transition back into the helicopter mode, land vertically. You would get out, take the elevator down to the ground floor, and walk the final 100 meters to your office. So that's kind of what the experience is going to be like. I think over time, there is also the possibility that these flying vehicles become even smaller, where rather than it being like a 4 or 5 seat thing, it could just be a single seat thing. And then you have even more flexibility about where you can take off or land. So if you could ultimately have a vehicle so small that it could take off or land in the size of a parking space, then we don't need these dedicated vertiports. And I really hope that will come. I think it requires a lot more work in terms of public acceptance and figuring out the regulations and how exactly that's going to integrate with vehicle traffic on the ground. But there are some really exciting concepts in work. And while you've got YouTube open, look up Opener Blackfly. Opener Blackfly is a single seat electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that will be available for sale quite soon. Initially, it will be in the ultralight category, which means that it can only be used for recreational purposes, but you do not require a pilot's license, and the aircraft doesn't have to be certified. So these are going to be really cool, really fun. You'll be able to start using it really soon, and hopefully over time it can reach higher and higher levels of safety assurance and be integrated into a normal commute as well.
It's madness, Ben.
It's awesome madness.
It is awesome, and I was like Googling all these things. I remember seeing the Uber Elevate thing, I think even like a year or two ago. And so, I mean, even just looking at the Uber Elevate, right, it looks like a helicopter. So my question is, why don't we have this now with helicopters everywhere? Is it because
Great question.
Is it because of sound, safety? Why don't we have, hundreds of flying helicopters here in the Bay Area?
Fantastic question.
There are a myriad of reasons that you might want to deliver learning content without taking your learners inside a formal training environment like a learning management system. You might, for example, want to deliver micro-learning to targeted audiences, or to move the learning itself to the point of need on your corporate intranet or other web server. You might want to present the training in an informal environment or encourage engagement by presenting it as a part of a larger narrative. You might want to integrate a gamified structure and provide learning elements as rewards. You might even want to deliver some of your courses directly on mobile devices or wrap them in your own custom apps. Now it's possible to accomplish all of these things and much more using Adobe Captivate Prime LMS. Visit www.adobe.com/LMS/demo to learn more and request a free demo of the headless LMS technology, along with strategies and tips to get the most out of the LMS's API and headless embedded fluidic player technology, which provides an unparalleled learner experience. And now, back to the show.
So in the 60s, we did, and early 70s, we did have some helicopter airlines. There was one in San Francisco, there was one in Los Angeles, there was one in New York. The ones in New York and LA shut down because of accidents. So helicopters are not super safe. They're pretty safe. I fly helicopters. I love them. I flew one yesterday. But they're not really that safe. So the accident statistics, round numbers, are basically one accident for every 100,000 flight hours. So, if you're a helicopter pilot that flies a lot, you maybe fly 10,000 hours in your career. So that means you fly 10 careers and you're going to have an accident. That sounds okay for, typical helicopter operator. But if this is every single day flying around San Francisco and you have 1 million people commuting an hour each way to work in these helicopters, you would have 10 accidents a day. And while we're used to that with cars, we're not used to that with things that fall from the sky. And there's a really different sort of emotional issue with things falling from the sky than cars colliding on the ground. So that's not sustainable. So I think safety is the big one, and I think that we can fix safety with in a couple of ways. One is the biggest reasons why helicopters crash is pilot error. So we need to get the pilot out of the aircraft, and that pains me to say it because I'm a pilot and I love to fly. But if we can make these things autonomous, you're going to solve at least half of the accidents. The second thing is the mechanical complexity. Helicopters are very, very complex mechanically, and moving to this distributed electric propulsion alleviates a lot of those problems. So I think those two things are going to make these aircraft a lot safer. The other one is noise. Noise are really, helicopters are really noisy, and that's the reason why the San Francisco helicopter airline shut down. So we have to make these quiet enough that they just merge seamlessly into everyday life. This new wave of distributed electric propulsion helicopters will do that. But we also have to show the general public that these things are useful for them, that it's not just for really, really wealthy people, fat cats who are getting around on helicopters. This has to be relevant for the everyday person. And that way you will then accept the potential, negative consequences of increased noise or visual pollution or what have you. So that comes down to cost. And these will become much, much more cost effective because they're electric, because they're autonomous, because they are high scale, and because we now have shared ride models that allow people to share a ride together rather than having to charter one of these helicopters just for themselves. So all of those things, I think, will contribute to this becoming a reality for people in their daily lives.
Are these going to be piloted or autonomous people movers?
Eventually they will be autonomous, but that will take time. Yeah. The reality is that they will be safer when they are autonomous, but the regulators don't understand that, or at least maybe they do understand that from a theoretical strategic perspective, but they don't really know how to get there in a direct way. So they need to move iteratively. And so moving iteratively means let's start by having pilots on board. We know that pilots can solve contingencies that pop up that maybe the computer wasn't expecting. Pilots have been doing that for 100 years. So let's start with pilots. And then over time, let's reduce the amount of piloting that's required. Maybe we put the pilot on the ground, but they still have remote control. And then maybe the pilot is managing several vehicles and not just one. And eventually there won't be any pilots in the loop. So that's kind of the progression that we'll see.
You actually mentioned something interesting a couple minutes ago, and that was this the emotional side. Of course, you mentioned it in terms of accidents, right? I mean, obviously, people see things falling from the sky, they're going to freak out. Do you think people will be comfortable? I mean, even now, getting into autonomous vehicle, a lot of people say they're a little weirded out by it. Do you see this being a hurdle that we're going to have to cross? Is getting past that kind of emotional, maybe, I don't know, uncertainty of getting into a flying drone?
Yeah, and same for self-driving cars. All these things are new. Whenever there is a new breakthrough technology introduced, people have to kind of understand that, and it takes time for them to understand that. In the 90s, nobody really understood that there was a reason to have maps in your phones, but now we take maps in our phones for granted. Or when the first smartphone came out, nobody thought that they needed a camera in their phone, or what are people going to do with their camera phones that's going to invade my privacy? We've gotten over that. When cars first came out, people were so afraid of cars that you had to have flagmen who walked a quarter mile ahead of the car with orange flags to get people off the road before the car came through at a blazing 5 miles an hour. So yes, people are going to have to over time learn what this new technology means for them in their lives, get used to it, understand the value of it, and then take it for granted. Ultimately, is what happens. The self-driving car thing fascinates me. We have 40,000 road deaths per year in the United States. Most of those are caused by drivers that are making mistakes, not by mechanical failure. And yet, in all the self-driving car experiments that have been going thus far, we've had one fatality, which was the Uber car in Arizona, and everybody freaked out. Wow, somebody died. Yes, it's horrible. It's tragic. It truly is. But how many more lives could be saved if we had autonomous cars on the road right now? Would these 40,000 road deaths we have every year go down to 10,000 or less? I bet they would. But we don't think of it like that, right? So it does take a shift in thinking. People need to see it with their own eyes. They need to touch it. They need to ride in these things. They need to come to appreciate their capability. And then over time, I think we will all start to take this technology for granted.
I think it's also because if it's a person driving, and I know this sounds terrible to say, but there's somebody responsible, right? You could say, okay, he did that, she did that. Whereas if it's an autonomous vehicle or if it's an autonomous drone, it's kind of like, well, who's responsible? You know, the algorithm did this. Why did the algorithm do this? And then it becomes such a, you know, convoluted thing of addressing blame and why and what was the mistake, that I think people have a very hard time wrapping their minds around that it's not the fault of a person that did it.
Right.
And
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in that situation, I mean, I don't know, whose fault is it? Is it like I mean, what happens in that kind of situation? I don't even know.
So in the case of autonomous cars, there have been some car companies, or at least one that I know of, that stepped up and said, we will take the responsibility for accidents as the car manufacturer. That may be a solution. I don't know if that's going to be acceptable to society or not. In the case of regulating aviation, thus far, the regulators have said that there will always have to be a pilot in the loop because there has to be somebody responsible. So even if that pilot is managing, 1,000 vehicles from a ground station, if one of those vehicles goes awry, then that pilot is responsible for correcting the problem. We'll see. I don't think that that's really scalable. I think that human nature will evolve over time, and we'll come up with new constructs that provide a suitable alternative to this concept that there always has to be some human responsible.
How far out do you think these things are? And so maybe you can give me your idea on two timelines. So one would be kind of like seeing this on the fringes, which I know we kind of are in some places like Dubai, but how long before we see, I don't know, maybe one, maybe two of these things in the Bay Area or in Southern California? And how long before you think this is, we see 100 of them outside, 200?
So there's a fantastic Peter Drucker quote, which I'll paraphrase, which basically says, focus on the future that is happening now. And we have an incredible future that is happening right now. And you're seeing that in industrial drones, like we talked about earlier. These things are flying today in huge numbers, way more than traditional aircraft. So, you only see 747s in the sky because they're big. These little drones are really small, so you don't see them, but they're flying 5-10 times as much as traditional aircraft are already. And those are a really, really fantastic proxy for these giant drones that are moving people in terms of the technology that's in them, their sort of mode of operation, and so forth. So the future is happening now. In terms of when will people be able to get in these things and fly in them, I think it will start with more recreational type applications. For example, the company Opener that I mentioned with their Blackfly aircraft. My guess is that you'll be able to buy one of those next year, and you won't be able to fly in San Francisco, but if you have a vineyard in Napa, you could fly it over your vineyard. Maybe we'll see the opportunity to rent those things for vacation. You're at the Grand Canyon or you're in Hawaii. You want to see the volcanoes in some new way, in a self-flown way. In less than 20 minutes, let's say, of training, you could know how to maneuver this aircraft. You can fly it yourself without a pilot's license. It will have all kinds of protections built in to make sure you don't do anything wrong. You don't fly into the wrong places. And you'll be able to have this sort of self-piloted experience. I think that's going to happen in the next few years.
Like 3 to 5, maybe?
I think under 3, you'll be able to do that.
Wow.
Then you will start to see more of these large-scale drones flying packages. So there's a large demand for moving freight into smaller population centers. So certainly very easy to get your Amazon package in San Francisco. But what if you lived in the middle of Wyoming, or in the middle of India, where the road infrastructure is really bad, and you need to get your UPS, your FedEx, you need to move, say 250 kilograms of cargo over 250 kilometers, and it's very difficult to get there by road because you would just have to send a very small little car with that freight, and it's very expensive. Well, you can now move it with one of these electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and you create this what I like to call a low latency freight link for everybody in the world. So it allows for anybody living anywhere in any small village or town to be connected to a global marketplace. And you can leverage this technology to create that freight link without putting people at risk, because you're not putting anybody on board the aircraft. So I think it starts with cargo. The general public becomes comfortable with that. I think you're going to see that happening, between 2 and 5 years from now. And then ultimately, I think, this really does become a part of everyday urban life with people flying in them. I think that's still 10 plus years away. It's not only about gaining the public acceptance, but it's also about building the infrastructure. There's billions of dollars of physical infrastructure that will have to be built to support that, and that will take time.
There's probably also something to be said for skilling, reskilling, retraining employees, new jobs that are going to be created in this space for drone designers, drone pilots, maybe using augmented and virtual reality to pilot drones. Do you see a whole new market or an industry being developed just around kind of the talent pool for drones?
Absolutely. And we actually already see this in the number of certified drone pilots in the U.S., which is now more than 1 million. So
wow, there's 1 million certified drone pilots in the U.S.? Jeez.
Yeah. And it's not difficult to get a remote pilot certificate. You can do it with a couple of days of studying, and you take a written test. But many people are making this a career, and they're figuring out how to employ their passion for flying into something that they can really gain economic benefit from. So you have many of these industrial companies, whether they railroads or oil companies or the telecom tower owners, like I was mentioning earlier, who don't have pilots on staff, but they contract with drone service providers. And one example of those companies is called DroneBase, which is another Santa Monica-based company like where we are. And DroneBase is basically a network of independent pilots who fulfill these missions for these companies. So that is a real viable career that exists now, and lots of people are doing it. I absolutely see there being more and more demand for all kinds of talent in this, not just flying these things, but building them. We need to build an industrial base here in the United States to actually manufacture drones and the future of electric helicopters. We need people who understand artificial intelligence and automation, more scientists and engineers and technologists to build all of these systems that are going into these aircraft. There's a tremendous amount to do.
Can you talk a little bit about the automation and the technology piece for drones? Because on this podcast, I've had quite a few IT people come on, and technology always comes up in the form of automation and jobs and the impact that it's going to have, and it's a very, very big topic. Can a lot of these concepts be also applied to drones, as far as the same types of artificial intelligence that maybe you might see inside of an organization taking over repetitive tasks be used for helping navigate or pilot a drone? So same concept when we think of AI and automation that we're seeing inside of companies also being applied to drones.
Yes, and sort of in two buckets. One is in the operation of the drone. So as you suggested, making sure that the thing is flying in the right place, it's following the most efficient route, it's not colliding with obstacles. And then second is deriving insights from the data that the drone collects. So a lot of what my company does at Airmap is with the first part, how do we apply artificial intelligence to the operation of a drone and make that available as a service through our open platform. And a lot of the people that build applications for drones and integrate our services do analysis on the data using artificial intelligence. So if you're surveying say like a flame stack at a refinery, you want to be able to automatically take the imagery that's coming off the drone and find cracks, for example. So can use AI to do crack detection. Power lines, we've just had some massive fires in California that could be attributed to down power lines. Can we use a drone to fly over the power lines, inspect, make sure that there's no vegetation encroaching on the power lines that could cause a fire, Absolutely. And using artificial intelligence to identify those places where the vegetation is too close to the power lines is already being done. I think has the potential to save literally billions of dollars of losses from these fires. So there's all sorts of applications of AI that are making not only the operation but also the intelligence that comes from these drone flights more useful.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by the impact this will have on talent. I actually even remember seeing a couple of job descriptions for organizations who are looking for drone pilots. Like this is now actually something that companies are looking for, which is very, very interesting. And I mean, thinking 3-5 years in the future, I think this definitely seems like a big area for.
We're actually also seeing some retraining of employees now. So we're working with a number of oil companies who consider their sites to be very sensitive. They don't want to welcome contractors onto their sites. So rather than hiring outside drone pilots, they're actually training their own engineers to fly drones. So this becomes a supplemental skill set for their employees.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's, like I said, I'm totally fascinated by this space and the impact that drones going to have. Now, for a lot of people listening to this, they're probably working in an office, right? They're working for, one of the Fortune 1000 companies out there. What do you think that they need to know or think about when it comes to drones? Is there any impact that we just as regular individuals will feel as a result of drones? Is there anything we need to do or know about or expect?
Well, I think we're really living in an age of increased information flow. And the more data we have about the environment that we work in or the project we're working on, the better the insights are from that data, the better the quality of our decision making with respect to our jobs. And so you see this manifested in this whole trend toward 4D digital twins, for example, what we call 4D digital twin, but generally in the construction or real estate business, they call digital twins of buildings and other assets. Drones are making it much easier to collect the quality data about your assets to help you make better decisions. I think that this is going to save time. It's going to improve efficiency, decrease cost, all of these things that all of us in business are trying to achieve. So I think that's the bottom line. Is this is all about making work better, making work easier, increasing the productivity of individuals and their organizations.
And I suppose if you're a business leader at a company, I don't want to speak for you, but probably your word of advice would be start thinking about drones and how you might be able to apply them to what your company or your business does.
Yeah, it's if you haven't started already, you should start right away. Your competitors are already working with drones. They're already seeing the benefit of drones. Many of these large enterprises that have been experimenting with drones are now moving from an experimentation phase into a scaling phase where they maybe have had a drone initiative in their innovation department and are now moving that across the enterprise and figuring out how they can really make this a part of their workflow, how the data that's collected from drones can be integrated into their ERP systems. How do you really make this a part of the fabric of how our company operates? That's happening now in a lot of businesses across lots of industries all around the world. So it's not too late, but you should get started right now.
So how would you get started? Do you have any recommendations on, well, for two, I guess, if you're a leader and you want to start thinking about making investments in drones for your business, what would you do? And let's say you're an employee at a company and you're thinking of maybe switching careers and getting involved with drones. How can you start to learn about what's happening in that space, get certified, get kind of more involved?
Yeah, so there's a ton of resources online. There are a ton of conferences. There's a lot of information. If you have a particular use case, you have a particular application that you think is relevant for your business, and you want to talk about that, you can certainly reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with folks either in my company or other companies in the industry that have experience with that. We can help you understand what works and what doesn't work. If you are an employee, don't hesitate to get your remote pilot certificate. This is colloquially called the Part 107 certificate. Part 107 is the section of the Federal Aviation Regulations under which you can operate a drone for a commercial purpose. So check out the FAA's website. You can Google Remote Pilot in Command certificate or Part 107 certificate. Take an online course. Take a course at a local community college. Get your certificate. Go buy a drone. They're not that expensive. You can buy a great drone for less than $500. Fly it, use it for fun, take photos and video of your family at the beach or wherever, and get familiar with it, enjoy it, and start to really appreciate what's possible.
Well, before we wrap up, I have just a couple fun rapid fire questions for you. Being an entrepreneur and the CEO of a company, I'm sure you're going to have all sorts of really interesting responses to these. But just a few rapid fire personal questions for you, starting off with, what has been your greatest business failure?
I fail at a lot of things all the time, so it's hard to say a single one. But I think the key is to realize all those small failures and continually improve the way that you operate.
Do you have a embarrassing moment at work?
I can't give you one. I embarrass myself all the time, but I'm happy to readily admit when I make a mistake and move on.
All right, and last two for you. What is your favorite business or non-business book that you recommend people check out?
I just started reading a great one. I'm not even through it all the way, but I know I'm going to love it. It's called Reboot by can't remember his first name. His last name is Colonna, but it's a great book about sort of taking a step back from the day-to-day, seeing your place in the world, and gaining a sort of appreciation for your leadership capability.
Fantastic. And very last question for you. If you would have ended up doing a different career, what do you think you would have ended up doing?
Probably medicine. I'm really fascinated by how the body works and really love helping people.
I love it. Well, and it fits well. I mean, there's a lot of implications for drones and medicine as well. So good fit there. Well, Ben, where can people go to learn more about you and Airmap and any resources that you recommend people check out as far as drones or your company?
So our website is www.airmap.com, and you'll find me and our whole team there. If you're interested in all this flying car stuff we talked about, there's a fantastic website called transportup.com. Transportup.com, which is has a whole archive of all of the flying car projects that are underway. There's also a podcast and a weekly newsletter with that, so you can kind of stay abreast of the latest in the flying car space.
Fantastic, Ben. Well, thank you so much for your time. I mean, for me, at least personally, this has been fascinating. I've learned a lot about what's happening in the world of drones, so thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Again, my guest has been Ben Marcus. He's the founder of Airmap, and make sure to check them out. He's also on LinkedIn as well. I'll see all of you next week. Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Work podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please do me a favor and rate and review the show on iTunes or whatever your preferred podcast platform is. And remember, if you want to take your education even further by getting access to courses based on some of the themes that I explore in this show, then check out futureofworkuniversity.com. If you're interested in being added to my newsletter, you can do that by visiting thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And you can also get in touch with me directly if you have any inquiries for podcast sponsorships, working with me, or having me keynote your next event. My email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. I will see you next week.